Okay, well, this week we're here with Gil Friend, Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Palo Alto. We like to think of you as the sustainability czar, maybe, or the climate guru.
Well, no czar, no power.
Oh. Well, we're grateful that you're here. In the last part of the month of January, there were a couple events that kind of focused the city's attention on sustainability. There was the summit and then a study session with the City Council. So I thought we would start just by kind of setting a context, really, because when people listen to you, they see a much broader picture of what sustainability is than I think maybe traditionally has been kind of promoted with the idea of reducing greenhouse gases. Because a lot of people think of that as a restrictive approach, kind of a strategy of things that people shouldn't be doing. You know, let's not drive our cars so much, or let's recycle instead of throwing things into the landfill. But listening to you, you have kind of a positive, proactive perspective, opportunities, that could be in store for the city. You mentioned resilience, you mentioned economic enhancement, better quality of life.
Yeah.
So maybe you could unpack that a little bit and tell us how you came to that perspective.
Well, I think, Jocelyn, you've summarized it very well. I'm focused on how do we grow quality of life, build prosperity, improve resilience for the community, and do that while improving our climate posture, actually by doing that. Hair shirt environmentalism is so last century. The notion of of nobly suffering for the general good and to make the planet better is a very old-fashioned idea, and it's got a very deep flaw in the thinking. The thinking had been that in order to do good, you have to give up something. If you want to get better environmental quality, you have to suffer economically or suffer in your lifestyle. But here we are in the heart of Silicon Valley, in the land of innovation. We know about making things better. Delivering better performance at better prices with better quality. So I think our challenge as a community is to figure out how to, as I said, build quality of life for all of our citizens, do it in a way that enhances our economic prosperity, and that improves our resilience as a community. And this is where the climate connection is, because we're going to face a very bumpy ride for the rest of this century, between rising temperatures and sea level rise, and flooding and what some people call climate chaos. There's going to be a lot of challenges thrown at us. And we have to be able to both do what we can to minimize that, but since that will come, how do we adapt to it effectively? And adapt the community so that both as individual families and as the infrastructure of a city, we can create a course that reduces our risks and improves our quality of life.
And these conversations that Jocelyn's mentioned, the summit and the study session, are all taking place in the context of Palo Alto pursuing a new sustainability and climate action plan.
Yes.
This document that you've been working on for a few years, and that's kind of...
Well, for a little over a year, about a year and a half.
And the council is going to be discussing it later this year. And one of the things that came out of the last few meetings is this idea of Palo Alto reducing carbon emissions by 80% by 2030, which is more ambitious than the state's goal. I was hoping to get your thinking about the importance of setting a firm goal like that and the possible pitfalls of not meeting that goal.
Sure. The goal that we're suggesting, 80% reduction by 2030, let me give that a context. California, which has been a leader for decades on these issues, has set a goal of 80% reduction of emissions by 2050, 80% reductions from the 1990 levels.
Right.
By 2050. The state has set an interim target of 40% reduction by 2030. So that's one part of the context. The other part of the context is that Palo Alto has already reduced emissions by about 35%. Since 1990. This is from a combination of efforts, most visibly our carbon neutral electricity strategy, but a lot of other things that we've done in terms of efficiency programs from Palo Alto Utilities, the Zero Waste Initiative, which has us as probably the second best city in the country, just an inch behind San Francisco on that. So all of these things have contributed to bring us to 35% reduction now, probably the highest or one of the highest reductions of any city in North America. So when we look from here in 2016 to a 40% goal by 2030, that seems like we're very much within striking distance, and it seems like kind of too easy.
Transportation, which is the kind of elephant in the room. The next question is, how does a city like Palo Alto deal with a problem that's so regional in scope? Like, how could the city council take action that would keep people from other cities from using non-electric vehicles, for example?
Well, You're right, Gennady. It's a big challenge. You can think of it in terms of the zones of action that we have. There are things that the city government controls directly. There are places where the city government has influence with the community, which could be through education or could be through regulation in a variety of ways. And there's the relationship to the larger region. We have to do all three of those. But we have to think about it systemically. We've been, I think, very confused about transportation. We, not Palo Alto, we the region, or really the society. Typically we've addressed if there's too much traffic, we add more roads, but then if there's more roads, there's more traffic. If there's not enough parking, we add more parking, and then there's more cars that come to use the parking, and there's not enough parking. So I think that's a wrong-headed approach. Palo Alto has been on record since the 1998 comp plan, I believe, as wanting to reduce our dependence on the automobile, on the private automobile, but we provide free parking, which is an incentive for people to drive. So we have to think systemically, what are the incentives that shift behavior? What are the things that we can do directly? So let's take them in turn. Directly, one of the things we have control over is the free parking. It's free as in quotes. Those parking spaces cost about $300 a month to deliver, if you look at the amortized cost of building a parking space. So in effect, it's a $300 a month gift to private car drivers from all of us as a community. So I think it's a fair question to look at is, do we want to do that? Is that the best use of those funds to generate the kind of community that we want? Or might we want to think about doing what Stanford has done, where they instituted a parking charge a few years back. They used the revenues from parking to fund the Marguerite shuttle and other non-private car transportation services. And Stanford has reduced their single occupancy vehicle rate, SOV rate, from the high 70% to the high 40%. Well, pretty striking, and in a way that's very satisfying for people who live, who work on the campus. So we might look at something like that as one of the options to consider.
But Stanford is not a democracy like Palo Alto is, and they have a mandate from the county to reduce trips, so they didn't really have a choice. I feel like the city council is, subject to all sorts of political pressures from neighborhoods, from business leaders, from the Chamber of Commerce. So 61% sounds like a really big number as far as transportation, its proportion in carbon emissions. Are there any particular policies you think that the city should explore to kind of reduce that?
Well, again, I think there's a few things. One is that we could look at the parking incentive, and not just to say charge for parking, but use those revenues to support other kinds of transportation services. People have talked about expanded shuttle services, much more frequent, or dynamic and responsive shuttles. People have talked about first and last mile solutions to make it easier for people to get to and from workplace and Caltrain. So the Downtown Transportation Management Association, which the city has established, working with major employers downtown, is working with Lyft and other providers to enable simple, convenient, economical ways to make it easier for more people to use Caltrain.
I'm curious, are there other cities, because Stanford, again, is kind of its own entity, but are there other cities that have kind of had a lot of success in reducing their single occupant vehicle rate?
Sure.
We could draw on as an example.
Portland's a great example with innovations in mass transit and bike-friendly city. Copenhagen, in the land of cold and wet, has got bicycle ridership rates that are off the charts. We've actually done very well here with our Safe Routes to School program and our bicycle and pedestrian plan. We have 44% of our high school students biking to school. Stunning number. So it shows what's possible if you provide good, convenient services. City of Los Angeles, which beats us, of course, as having the worst traffic in the country, has a goal of reducing their SOV trips by 50%. Now, try to imagine, how does LA move from the car? And if they can think about that, we can think about that. And it's ambitious, but the challenge, here's the thing, the question I think that we need to ask is, how do we make it more convenient for anybody, anywhere, at any time, to not have to get into a car and drive? Now, listen to what I'm saying. I'm not saying stop anybody from driving. I'm not saying ban driving. I'm not saying make driving more difficult, which is what some people think about. I'm saying, how do you make it more convenient? And so I ask this question of just about every citizen I talk to. And most people say, gee, that's a great idea. I would really like that. Pause. But it'll never work for me because of the circumstances of my life. I have to pick up kids after school, or I have a second job, or whatever it is. But to my way of listening, those are not reasons not to do it. Those are design factors that we need to take into account. That's the kind of flexibility that we need to provide in our services so that it's more convenient for each and every citizen.
I have a question about technology, actually. Yeah. I mean, we talked about, mentioned Stanford earlier, and Stanford, you know, for better or worse, Leland, Stanford was the mass transportation baron. He was a railroad baron in the 19th century. So we kind of have that. If we use that as a model, perhaps, and say, how can Palo Alto become sort of a model city for mass transportation and innovation in terms of technologies? Because we are right in the middle of Silicon Valley. Is that a strategy that we could look at and develop?
It absolutely is, Sue, and it's a real key. This sort of opens up the conversation about what's called mobility as a service. This is an idea that was pioneered, as far as I can tell, out of Helsinki in Finland. The city has convened a series of meetings with regional partners. This is to your question about how do we work with the region. City Manager Jim Keane convened a meeting about a year ago in City Hall with people from City of San Jose, Mountain View, Menlo Park, Stanford University, a number of other local employers to look at what can we do regionally.
Is that specifically around mass transit or
specifically around
transportation?
A comprehensive mobility solution that makes it easier for people to not drive. And the key is to do transportation the way we've done communications. In here, I've got a subscription contract with a provider who gives me wireless broadband access, gives me voice minutes, gives me data minutes, gives me a variety of services bundled into a subscription for a certain number of dollars a month. My bundle's probably different than yours because you may be a gamer and I'm not, so we have different data needs. What if we did transportation that way? What if there was a single app on your phone that let you plan, book, ride, and pay for every mode of transportation you might imagine, ranging from Caltrain to VTA, to bike share, to Lyft and Uber, to a limo, to a Hummer up to Tahoe, whatever you wanted to do at whatever time, in a single app, in a single solution, point, click, done. You don't have to pay each time. It's all built into the process. That starts to get it thinking about how do we make it easier and convenient, not 15 different apps for different services, one thing, boom. That's what the Finns have been pioneering. There's a number of vendors in the United States who've been building services like that. We're looking at how to adapt something like that for this region. But again, the key isn't the technology. The key, and the Finns were very clear when we got excited about their technology development. They said, no, don't get hooked by the technology. The point of this is that it's a customer-centric solution. It's focused on how do you make it easier for people to have the life they want. The technology just helps you do that. So I think we have enormous possibilities here, both given the conditions that we have, but also the amazing business and technology community that we have here. We reinvent the world over and over again. This thing didn't exist 10 years ago.
That's true.
And now it's not just a communications platform, but maybe a transportation platform. I mean, this is my car. This is how I get around the Bay Area.
But I'm curious, would these kinds of solutions work in a community that's nowhere nearly as dense as Copenhagen or Portland or Helsinki? Because I imagine the challenges of having like a robust shuttle system in a city where there's like 66,000 residents, and I understand the workforce adds many more numbers.
Sure.
But to what extent does density and play into this conversation? I know it was a big topic when Puck Mickelby gave his presentation at the summit. I mean, walkable communities is kind of one of his three kind of pillars of sustainability. Is it possible to achieve this kind of vision without having more density?
People talk about thinking globally and acting locally. It's because local is different everywhere you go. Every community is different. So we need to take some general principles and adapt them to the needs of the local community. Palo Alto is a largely residential community. Much of it is a suburban landform. We have pockets of density. So whatever we develop has to be adapted to that. So let's think about a hybrid. What if you took something like Lyft and Uber on-demand transportation, but a little pricey, and something like the shuttle, which is free in Palo Alto, but very infrequent schedules and very limited routes? What if we could merge those? What if we could increase shuttle routes and increase shuttle frequency, and using this kind of technology have dynamically responsive shuttles that could adjust their route based on where the requests were coming from? That might be a way to effectively serve the lower density residential neighborhoods that we have. as an
One
example.
statistic that I was intrigued by was the idea that 7 minutes is some sort of golden time, that people are willing to wait or walk between points.
There's a distance people will walk, a time people will wait. 30-minute shuttles aren't viable as an overall solution. But then you have to, but you can't run shuttles every 5 minutes if they're not going to be used. So you have to find the dynamic, the balance. And I think this kind of dynamically responsible technology supported solution might be one of the ways to do that. Certainly one of the things we could look at.
You were mentioning just people's responsiveness to the ideas that are being presented. They like the idea, they don't think it'll personally work. So I wanted to ask you about what you've heard from the general population in Palo Alto as far as taking some of these ideas. Are we ready for it? Is this going to be an uphill battle to change people's perceptions and habits?
I don't think we know yet, Jocelyn. We had 300 people at the summit. We've had a number of other community events with a few hundred other people. We've done some surveys of a few hundred more people. From the people we've spoken to, we hear general enthusiasm with the approach, disagreement over the specific details, but we understand that that doesn't represent the whole community. And so part of the job of this year is to have a much broader conversation, hear from more people. But again, it's not a matter of hearing are people for it or against it. It's hearing what are your concerns, what are your needs? How do we tailor a program that can be really responsive to the very diverse needs of this community? And I think if we can do that well, I think generally people in Palo Alto are supportive of environmental responsibility. People recognize that we need to do something about climate, both individually individually as families, as a city, and as a country. So I think the general set of mind is favorable, but it all comes down to the details. People say, well, what's that going to mean for me? How's it going to affect my life? Is it going to make my life easier or harder? And that's where the design innovation comes in. Let's find a way to do this that makes people say, that was great. And that really works for me.
And I think the one area where the concept and the potential reality have kind of a gap between them is the idea that was proposed in the last year or two about getting people to switch from natural gas to electricity. The city famously has a carbon neutral electric portfolio, which gives Palo Alto a lot of leverage in kind of taking care of transportation.
It gives us leverage and gives us opportunity. It gives us some degrees of freedom that most other cities don't have.
But at the same time, the natural gas utility could possibly flounder if people start switching because of the fixed costs and the fact that revenues would decline if people switch. So how could you facilitate this kind of initiative without destroying the natural gas utility? Is it possible, or is it? It seems like it would be one of the huge challenges if you want to cut into the roughly 20% of the carbon emissions that comes from natural gas.
About 25%. It's a great question, and the answer is we don't know yet. City Council last year directed staff to explore electrification, as it's called, or fuel switching. So we've got 10 different streams of analysis underway looking at what is feasible. What are the economics? What are the legal issues? What are the issues in relation to the utility? First and foremost, we're not going to ask anybody to do anything that's not economic. So if you look at the kinds of ways we use natural gas, today it's economical in many cases to switch your water heating from natural gas to what are called heat pump water heaters. Not electric resistance water heaters, but heat pump water heaters. Those are economical today. Switching the space heating of your house, not economical today, so we're not going to propose that at this point. So we're trying to understand what are the dynamics, what's economical when, and of course the technology changes as we know, and so the economics will shift. So part one is to understand that. Part two is to understand the legal constraints in terms of what Palo Alto Utilities is able to do. And then there's the larger question of the dynamics for Palo Alto Utilities. We have a great utility. It has an enviable safety and reliability record. So to be very clear, we will do nothing that compromises the safety, reliability, or integrity of the natural gas system. That said, markets do change, and it's not just because we're going to possibly encourage electrification, but as solar prices drop, and as battery prices drop, and as we see the rapid price curve changes that we've been seeing over the last few years, customers are going to choose different things. We've been approached by a developer recently who's looking at building an all-electric building because it seems to make sense for them. So it's not just for the utility to say, let's go this direction. The utility has to respond to the market. And the market, I think, will challenge natural gas utilities over the coming years. So it's not a question of do we say yes or no. It's not a question of do we dig in our heels and try to resist the trends of the future. Let's get smart and figure out what do we do. How do we do this in a way that's advantageous for our citizens, that builds in the flexibility, lets us adapt? And you've put your finger on one of the difficult challenges that we need to understand. We're not going to figure that one out quickly. But if we understand the questions, get them on the table, we've got smart people both in city government and in this community who can work to figure that out.
You've touched upon one thing that I'm really intrigued by, which is changing technology and adapting. So in the past 10 years, we've had a discussion within the city about a waste-to-energy plant in the Baylands.
Yeah.
And when the idea came up, there were a number of different proposals: dry anaerobic digestion, wet anaerobic digestion, some other technologies that are on the horizon that haven't been tried yet. How do you get a handle on changing emerging technologies, and how do you know when to bet on something that's about to maybe come to fruition, or maybe it won't? And it just seems like putting your stake in the sand too early might saddle you to something that's going to be obsolete in 10 years. I don't know.
It's a really tough question, and it's one that all of us have to grapple with. I mean, let me answer it philosophically first, then the specifics. Governments and planners tend to do a really good job of what I call extrapolative planning, looking at what the past trends are and projecting them forward and saying that's where we're going to go. It's one of our challenges, for example, around transportation. But we're in a world of disruptive change, Professor Stefan Heck from Stanford spoke at the City Council study session last week, and his observations that if you look at transportation, if you look at energy, if you look at buildings, the world will be utterly different in 10, 15, 20 years. So planning for what we've known from the past isn't the right thing to do, but on the other hand, how do you time the market? And anybody who's invested in stocks and bonds knows that it's tough to time the market. So what we do is we do the best analysis we can do. We have discussions in the community with people from diverse perspectives, and we figure out the best bet to make. Now, to hedge that, what I'm encouraging us to think about is to look for flexible platforms, to make moves that take us in the right direction but don't lock us in unnecessarily for too long. And it's tough. You take something like parking garages. We have proposals on the table now to build additional parking capacity in Palo Alto. If Professor Heck is right, we're not going to need that capacity in 10 years because of the shifts in the market, much less private cars as we get into autonomous vehicles and other things. So do you build a parking garage now and have it be obsolete in 10 years? Do you not build it now and have people upset that there's not enough parking capacity now? Do you build parking garages that are designed for adaptive reuse to be converted to different kinds of functions?
That's the flexibility that
That's
you're
one
talking
kind of
about.
flexibility, but which is, some people are interested in that idea. Some people say, no, that's too complicated, build it and just tear it down and replace it if it becomes obsolete. So there's a number of choices that need to be thought through. I don't have a clear answer for those. This is part of the deliberative process that we need to do over the next year or so. And I think the value of the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan work is that it provides a kind of design frame for those questions. It says, let's look through the lens of climate and greenhouse gases and ask the question of what are the strategies that would do the best job of that, because it's often the case, and this is again experience I think of hundreds of companies and dozens of cities around the world, is that asking that question often turns over some pretty interesting rocks with some very interesting solutions that can actually be more economical, deliver better customer service, deliver more flexibility and resilience. So that's the kind of inquiry that we're inviting the community into.
Yeah, I was reading Gennady's story about some of the ideas that came out of the summit, and I was really intrigued that I think the idea of just opening it up to whatever, you have kind of ambitious goals, and you kind of come out with ambitious ideas that may or may not work, but at least they get you asking the right questions.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why to do a bold goal rather than an easy goal, because people will ask different questions. People will turn over different rocks. They'll discover things. If we have an 80 by 30 goal, 80% reduction by 2030 goal, we will discover different things than if we aim at a 2050 goal. They won't all be right. They won't all be workable. We won't choose to do them all, but we get a much richer mix of opportunity to choose from.
Some of the things that came out that kind of struck me were let's all go vegan, or let's all have electric vehicles. And I just wonder, are there some lines of thought that we just shouldn't even waste our time on, because, or is everything?
How about all going vegan?
Is everything kind of helpful?
When you're in the exploratory part of an innovation process, it's best to keep the doors wide open. Let anything on the table. No idea is too crazy, but then you have to select. So look, are we all going to go vegan? Probably not. On the other hand, is our diet a significant part of our carbon footprint and our impact on the world? It certainly is. My personal approach there is not to tell anybody what to do or tell anybody what to eat, but to say, hey, do you understand the impact of your choices? So here, here's the impact of your car, here's the impact of your house, here's the impact of the hamburger. Make your choices. And I think an informed community, particularly this one, one of the most highly educated communities in the country, well-informed people will shift their choices, and we already see those choices happening. We already see vegan on the rise in the United States. Who would have thought that?
Yeah.
We already see car ownership on the decline. People 18 to 30 years old, car purchasing peaked in 1983. It's been coming down since then. Millennials are not only aren't buying cars, they're not even getting driver's licenses. So the world changes. People's knowledge, their sense of themselves, their sense of what works in their lives changes, it evolves. And so I think part of our job as a community, this is not, back to your question of where's our influence, there's some things the city government can regulate or mandate or fund, but some of it is we can encourage. In terms of what we talk about, with the kind of questions that come up in council, in community organizations, in neighborhood organizations, what's in the curriculum at the schools, to open up ideas and let people make the choices that they make.
One of the things that's happening in the city right now is just the update of the comprehensive plan.
Yes.
And I remember Jim Keane a couple meetings ago was talking about how we don't want to turn the SCAP, this Climate Action Plan, into sort of another big plan that unfolds over years and takes a long time to manifest itself, and we want some action as we go through. How does that happen? How do you know? How do you bite off? How do you eat an elephant? You bite it off, one step at a time. So I wanted to put that question to you.
Yeah.
How do we make sure this isn't a process that's going to go on for the next 10 years with,
Sure.
little movement?
I'm hearing two questions in what you're asking for me to take each of them. We are in a comprehensive plan process in parallel to the SCAP work. They need to coordinate. They need to wind up pointing in the same direction. And we're working on how best to do that. In terms of the kind of process and how long it takes, at the study session with council last week, I asked the council members to consider two different approaches to coming to a sustainability and climate action plan. One is that we could do a series of study sessions over the year, diving deep into every specific issue, energy, water, transportation, adaptation, and so forth. Figure out fairly detailed strategies and implementation plans, and then come back perhaps later this year, early next year, with a plan to approve. And that's one way to go, and it's probably our more traditional way of working as a city. And the alternate is, could we do something sooner that was focused on setting a goal, perhaps the 80% by 2030 goal, or 80 by 50, or something more aggressive. Set a goal, have a general sense of direction, what are the basic principles by which we would decide what to do, and what are the initial moves that we know we need to make, and do that soon, perhaps in the spring. And I'm speaking here, this is not my decision, this is obviously subject to discussion with the council and the city manager, but that was the question I asked. Would you be open to doing that, and then coming back in a series of other proposals to decide on specific detailed strategies and investments? My sense from the council was that they're open to the faster approach, and I think we'll need to talk with them over the next couple of months and see if that really works out, see if we can find enough coherence and convergence around some things that we pretty much know now that we need to do, and then continue to build it out. And this is really important because I think one of our challenges here is that, let's be clear, nobody knows how to do this. No one's ever done this before in any city in the world. So we're going to have to learn along the way. And I think our challenge is how to build in rapid learning cycles rather than slow learning cycles. Government tends to move fairly slowly, traditionally, not just us, governments all along. If we do experiments that take 1 or 2 years to plan, and then 1 or 2 years to run, and then 1 or 2 years to digest, we're missing the changes that are happening. So I think one of the things that I would encourage us to look for is places where we can do rapid experimentation. We do something that's a 3-month experiment and learn, and then adapt. Not lock ourselves in, but test and discover. One example that Joshua Mello, our chief transportation official, talks about is the notion of tactical urbanism. quick experiments with say, transportation and urban form. So instead of, for example, spending years to study how to change an intersection and do the engineering and ripping up streets and pouring concrete, go out on a weekend and paint some stripes on the road with different lanes. And leave it for a few weeks and see what happens. And then take the stripes up.
I remember the city has been resistant to those kinds of things in the past. I remember when Cal Avenue streetscape was happening, there was a proposal for merchants to temporarily kind of change the streetscape.
Yeah.
And the counter argument was that when you make like these kinds of temporary things, you don't really get the full economic benefit of kind of new lanes. So I think there sounds like there might be some limitations to that, but it's a good bet hedge.
This has to be worked through in the question of how long is temporary. Some people say don't do it too long. Some people say don't do it too short. So you have to try that out. And with a lot of these things, and take the case of, just say, pedestrian streets, which a number of cities have done. When they're proposed, people say, oh my God, that's crazy, it'll never work. Merchants say we're going to lose business, people aren't going to be able to drive up to our store. But when it's been done in Portland and Boulder and all sorts of other cities.
Right here in Cal Avenue.
Right here in Cal Avenue, it turns out that actually business goes up.
Yeah.
And people are able to get to stores easier, and people are more satisfied, spend more time in the neighborhood. So these are the questions we have to work through. This is not like we drop a solution from City Hall on everybody and say thou shalt. That's not the way it works. It's, in collaboration with the community, but let's all together find a way to be a bit more exploratory and experimental and try stuff and test it and be data driven based on evidence, not just based on our experience of what we've done in the past. Because look, we're in a world of change. Just again, look at the last 10 years. Look at the things we've taken for granted that are different. It's going to be like that in the next 10 years. Maybe we have a little bit of an ability to steer it in the ways we want.
Is there anything, any idea in the transportation realm that you're particularly excited about trying out, maybe in the short term? Something that you think would possibly either change the game around here or just change people's perspectives?
Well, I think some of the biggest ideas in transportation are number one, the mobility as a service solution, the integrated platform for all of your mobility needs, easy and accessible, number one. Number two is let's think about shifting our incentives, and instead of incentivizing the private car travel that we don't want because it means more congestion, maybe we put our dollars into something that gets us closer to what we do want. Third, and very important in the interim, is electrification of the fleets. The city has set a policy of acquiring electric vehicles for city-owned vehicles, not just because of the carbon impact, but because the total cost of ownership is about $5,000 less per vehicle for us. So we're being financially responsible as well as environmentally responsible. We're expanding. We've won an award for the most electric vehicle-ready infrastructure for small cities in Northern California, but we're continuing to build that out, adding more charging capacity to make it easier for people to use EVs and drive. And of course, the market is going to be moving more and more to electrification, to electric vehicles over time. So those are some of the three big levers in transportation, and again, very much working with our neighbors, both contiguous and in the whole region, to evolve a better transportation solution for the region.
Great.
There is also a wild card in all of this, though, and that is nature itself.
Yep.
So if we're in a situation of continuing drought, for example, and so we have less water and therefore less hydroelectric power, or any of those things, monkey wrenches that might be thrown into any kind of forward-moving plan.
There absolutely are monkey wrenches, and you've named a big one that I'm very concerned about. We talk about the current drought. Palo Alto's got a very robust and effective response to the drought. But as my friend Will Sarney at the Deloitte consulting firm says every time he sees me and we talk about this, he says, "Don't call this a drought." So what do you mean, Will? He says it's not a drought. Drought means a 3 to 5 year cycle of temporary dryness and returning to so-called normal. But if you look at normal for California, it's not what we think. This has been the driest, this has been the wettest century in the last 2,000 years. The folks at Jet Propulsion Laboratory at Caltech say that there's an 80% chance that we could be looking at a multi-decadal mega drought. So what does that mean? That means that, that the rainfall that we think is normal may not come back.
Right.
And the snowpack that we think is normal may not come back. Last year we had the lowest snowpack in 500 years. So hydro may not be a stable resource.
Right.
Hydroelectric power, and since our carbon neutral electricity strategy is founded on hydroelectric, 50% of the projected mix is hydroelectric, we may have to rethink that. Now the challenge is that we don't know exactly what's going to happen. So we have to build contingency plans to allow us the flexibility to move properly as conditions change. That may mean expanding our renewable power portfolio. 30 some odd percent now, going to 50% by 2017. Maybe that needs to go higher. We have a local solar goal of 4% now. Maybe that needs to go higher. And there are other options to consider, but I think the general point here, in response to what you're saying, is that we can't count on things being the same. We have to have flexible solutions in our pockets to be able to adapt.
Well, Gil Friend, it's been great chatting with you today. I think we need to wrap up this enormous topic at this point.
My pleasure.
Hope to have you back another time. So
Look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That's it for today. You can check us out on paloaltoonline.com or on Twitter at Palo Alto Weekly.